Welcome to Museum Archipelago. I'm Ian Elsner. Museum Archipelago is your audio guide through the landscape of museums. Each episode is never longer than 15 minutes, so let's get started. On December 14th, 1972, astronauts Gene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt were sitting in their lunar module on the lunar surface.
Reading you loud and clear, America. This is Challenger. We're coming up on 2:10 from liftoff.
They were about to take off and come back to Earth. They knew they would be the last humans on the moon for some time, but they didn't know for how long. Outside their lunar module, a specially designed color camera was rolling, ready to capture the lunar liftoff. A similar camera was used to try and capture the liftoffs of Apollo 15 and Apollo 16, but the mechanism meant to keep the spacecraft in frame as it ascended failed each time. Here, on Apollo 17, was the last chance to get a good shot.
Proceeded. 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector grid.
It worked flawlessly. We can watch as the awkwardly shaped ascent stage of the lunar module takes off. The camera pans upwards as the ascent stage gets smaller and smaller, then disappears into blackness. Then the camera pans down. The lunar surface and the lower half of the lunar module come into view. It's captivating. The hills of the moon rolling out into the distance, the blackness of space just above. This is the moon, without humans, but where humans have left a mark. As of this recording, Apollo 17 was the last time humans left low Earth orbit. But here's the thing. The landing site hasn't changed since 1972. That camera is still there, and when we visit again, the site will look identical. Since humans left the moon, there has been nothing to disturb the site. The moon has no atmosphere. There's no wind to bury the astronauts' footprints under dust.
These are pristine. They're the only human sites in the history of humanity that haven't been trampled over by other humans, haven't been rained on, so forth and so on. So they are distinctly pristine.
This is Michelle Hanlon, a space lawyer who volunteers with the organization For All Moonkind.
Hello, my name is Michelle Hanlon. I'm a space lawyer. I've spent about 25 years practicing corporate law in the United States and around the world, actually. And last year, I went to McGill's Excellent Institute of Air and Space Law and earned my LLM in space law. I was incredibly intrigued by the idea of preservation in outer space and the fact that nothing has been done at this point, up to this point in time, to preserve our first footsteps on the moon.
Now, the day goes by where I don't think about those landing sites on the moon. Michelle Hanlon and For All Moonkind are designing the legal framework to protect these sites. For All Moonkind is an organization that believes that the United Nations should act formally to protect and preserve those sites and all our human heritage in outer space. For Michelle Hanlon, these first footsteps and missions aren't a distraction from human progress. They are human progress.
If you look at all of humankind's sort of momentous achievements, when we harnessed fire to use to cook, when we realized, okay, we don't have to be scared of the water, let's build a boat and travel across it. Oh, we have time to now cultivate art, or we're going to take those beasts and domesticate them. Those all happened at a point in time. We don't know when. When did humans become spacefaring? We know exactly the date. We know exactly the time. We know exactly where. We can go back to that. We can pinpoint that very moment in history and go back and see and learn about ourselves at that moment.
So before we get too much further into protecting heritage sites on the moon, what is the framework for protecting heritage sites on Earth?
On Earth, most of cultural heritage protected at a national level. Every country looks internally at its own stuff and decides, oh, okay, we want to save this. This is national parks, the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. But the United Nations and the international community recognize that cultural heritage is a global phenomenon. Whatever, even if it happened in the United States, it's a human step forward, a human evolution from the first steps in Tanzania and the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, all the way to the launch pad at Cape Canaveral or in Russia. The international community came together and created the UNESCO World Heritage Convention, and it encourages countries to protect their own cultural heritage, and in some cases the UN will contribute funds to help preserve a cultural site. The key thing about becoming a UNESCO World Heritage Site, however, is that a nation itself will submit a nomination to the UN. So, for example, France would submit Lascaux and say, these are the caves in France. We think they should be considered world cultural heritage. We can't do that in space. No nation is allowed to have any sovereign interest in any real property in space. And so the United States can't go to the UN and say, hey, look, here's Tranquility Base. We think it should be a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Because by doing that, the United States is implicitly saying, oh, we own this, and we're going to nominate it because we consider it our property. That is just completely violates the Outer Space Treaty.
The Outer Space Treaty was signed in 1967. The treaty is focused on nation-states, and it doesn't address commercial exploration. Now that commercial exploration might be the primary way humans get into space, the idea is that the rules should be updated to account for this new reality. Anything you send up into space is still your property. There are about 70 landing or crash landing sites on the moon. Each is worth a visit. The Soviet Union's Luna 2, for example, is the first man-made object to crash land on another celestial body. But the Apollo landing sites, including the Apollo 11 site at Tranquility Base, are special because there were humans on board. Imagine the American flags you see in pictures from those missions, bleached white because of radiation from the sun.
It's very likely that the flag itself is bleached. Whether it was knocked down or not, I think it remains uncorroborated. I believe Buzz Aldrin has said he kind of thought he saw it go down. I don't believe we've had the opportunity, even with rovers flying over, to see if it's actually standing or not. But the field is going to look as desolate as when they were there. There will be things like urine bags, things they've tossed out. There's the messages of peace, which is a disc the size of a dime with the messages from 74 nations. Really touching messages. Everything from one country saying, if you live out there, we come in peace, to others saying, this is an achievement, recognizing the achievement as a human achievement, and every single one of those messages talking about peace for humanity. That was supposed to be left on the moon, and it almost wasn't. It was one of the things that Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong said, oh, shoot, we didn't leave the disc, and basically tossed it, over their shoulder as they were leaving. So there will be a path or a debris field, I guess, is what archaeologists would call it when they are uncovering a civilization. These are things that were tossed out that weren't going to make the trip back. But other than that, it will look eerily it will look exactly like it did when Buzz and Neil left.
So what are the proposals for a visitor center or a museum at Tranquility Base?
So it hasn't actually been bandied about that much with sort of a realistic view. A lot of people have conceptualized moon colonies and said, and this will be the museum. There's a course at USC on space architecture, and a professor there, Thangavelu, and he had a class that actually worked on, realistically, what could we do? Because, we don't want people stepping there. The regolith is going to ruin all of the footsteps, even if you're, 10 meters away, whatever. And they came up with a brilliant concept of a gondola. And so you would start at some center, and you would take a gondola around to all of the heritage sites, including Luna, and then you'd drift over the sites in this gondola, and then you're treated to a virtual reality experience. And I understand they do this in Lascaux. They've recreated the entire cave so everyone can see what it's like without actually doing damage to the cave. And so you would see them from above in person, and then actually go feel like you were stepping on them in a virtual reality museum kind of setting. I've actually heard people talking about using a system, drones don't work on the moon yet, but I'm sure someone will figure out a way to get something that can hover without disturbing the regolith, and just taking pictures of the entire thing and recreating it so people here on Earth can get the experience without actually having to go. And that you asked about whether I thought I would make it. I think my sons will make it. I sadly don't think I will, but my hope is that at the very least we would be able to go and send the right people up to recreate that experience, truly recreate it here on Earth. For All Moonkind, we're actually going to try and do it as part of an experiential awareness campaign to a virtual reality dome, and you walk in and you think that you're stepping on the moon, and there you see the footsteps and so forth. But that's all sort of going to be an artist's conception of it. If we can get the right photographs, people can actually just recreate, dust speck by dust speck, what it would be like to stand there.
So what is the story that the Tranquility Base Museum will tell? It seems to me that the story of humanity's exploration is much more compelling than the specifics of two American white guys who are chosen for their faith and their ability to look like an everyman.
You look back and realize they really did it 50 years too early. The fact that we haven't been back in 50 years means they really did something incredible. And yes, they were two white men from a Western country, but they really affected the world. One of the pure joys of what I do here for All Moonkind has been researching, and people from Mauritius, people writing letters to Neil Armstrong, just in awe. I have a classmate from Mauritius, and she dug up an article. This guy, he built his own ham radio so he could hear. He used to go to the U.S. consulate every day to say, what are they doing now? Did they go? What's happening? It really uplifted. It had the ability to uplift everybody in the world. Those footsteps are still there, untouched. Maybe there's some, meteor dust showers, whatever. But right now we've been lucky. They haven't been hit. The base, Tranquility Base itself, hasn't been hit by a meteor or any other space detritus. And that footstep is like humankind's first steps, walking erect. It has to be saved, because when my grandchildren are in space and on the moon on the way to deep space, I want them to see those footsteps and think, wow, look how far we've come.
This has been Museum Archipelago. We hope you enjoyed your visit. For more information or to submit feedback, go to museumarchipelago.com or museum_go on Twitter. Next time, bring a friend.